Welcome to the Comms Coffee Club podcast, where we bring you fascinating insights and conversations with communications leaders from across Fortune 500, FTSE 100, and leading global financial and professional services firms. I'm your host, Max Forsyth, founder and managing director of Comms Search and Selection, specialist in-house communications executive search and recruitment firm based in the UK, but covering the UK and US markets. And welcome to this week's Comms Coffee Club episode with the wonderful Stephanie Roberts. Stephanie joins us from the lovely Japan, although she's got 15 years of corporate communications experience working in the US and the formerly mentioned Japan. She's currently head of brand and communications for Hitachi, and prior to that spent a long time at Solaire, who Hitachi bought, and she was at Lochner prior to that. We have a really great conversation around all things brand communications, what it's like living and working in both the US and Japan, and the differences in culture and nuance, and how to get your audience and tone right in Western cultures such as the US, UK, and Europe versus Eastern cultures, including Japan, China, and what works best, both from a external communications and PR perspective, but also looking at the internal communication side and employee engagement. So there are some really fascinating insights here for anyone who is working in a global communications role or who aspires to work in global communications. So hope you like it. And yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe and follow wherever you like to consume the podcast. Stephanie Roberts, welcome to the Comms Coffee Club podcast.
Thank you so much for having me today, Max. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely not a problem. And and you're joining us all the way from, is it sunny Japan today or is it a bit rainy?
Today it was sunny. Yeah, maybe about 50 degrees and sunny. So a nice winter day here.
Yeah, no, sounds lovely. Sort of certainly nicer than the UK, which has been very rainy and wet and damp over the last few days. So kind of roll on spring here.
Oh, well, I'll try to send some sun your way.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you very much. Really looking forward to this. For everyone listening and watching, Stephanie Roberts is a great and really highly experienced communications professional, currently living and working out in Japan for Hitachi, but originally from the US. And so why don't we wind the clock all the way back? And how did you get into communications?
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, it kind of started from my college days. So when I went to college, I started as a business major, thinking I would go into accounting. And then I kind of quickly realized that I don't particularly enjoy doing my own budget. So why would I enjoy, doing a company budget? So After a year or so, I switched gears. I talked to some of the career counselors, kind of figured out what I'm passionate about. And they geared me towards communications, and kind of the rest is history. So I changed my major to communications. And then most of my entire career now has been in communications, except for probably my first job, where I was more of a marketing coordinator and doing more like proposal work, business development work. But after that, then I really fell into communications.
No, nice. Great. And and where was your first communications gig?
So actually at the first company I worked at, it was a civil engineering company. So I started there as a marketing coordinator, and then I moved into the corporate communications department after 2 years.
Nice. Great. And that was civil engineering in the US and...
Yeah, in the US called H.W. Lochner. So they're only in the US, but a national engineering firm in the US.
Got it. Yeah. And what did engineering comms look like back in the day? What was it? Yeah, kind of what was your day-to-day like?
Yeah, so at that time, it was a very small department. I think there were 3 or 4 of us on the team. But the president did have a focus on communications. And, I remember writing some of the executive messages just as a very junior communications person and working on some of the annual reports and such. So I think that really set a nice foundation for the rest of my career.
No, great. Yeah. And then where did you go to next?
So then after that, I moved to a law firm, Neil Gerber Eisenberg. They're
Okay.
headquartered in Chicago, one office, but about 150 attorneys or so. So another national company.
Yeah, yeah.
That was kind of a marketing communications role. I was doing corporate communications, but also some of the other, more marketing communications tasks. So that was
Yes.
another learning experience. So again, professional services, but the legal industry.
Yeah, going from engineering to legal and yeah, working with lawyers. I don't think it matters where in the world you work with lawyers, but they are a unique breed, and doing communications for them is interesting.
Yes, it was a very challenging role. Like you said, attorneys are very detail oriented, and
Yes.
I remember making one mistake. I think it was a typo in an email, and just kind of the reaction I got. I will never forget that, and try to never make a typo in an email again.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah. And nowadays we all have Grammarly, so it's okay.
Oh yes, I love Grammarly. Yes.
I love Grammarly. I don't know what I'd do without Grammarly.
Same
Um,
here.
yeah. Great. Yeah. And then where did you go to after law?
So then I moved to Solaire, which is now owned by Hitachi. So
Okay.
Solaire is a manufacturing company making air compressors. And, it's not the most glamorous of work, but air compressors are everywhere. And I don't know
Yes.
if you've been to Las Vegas, but the
I haven't.
Bellagio, they have the water show, but
Yes.
our compressors are under there to help power the water. So that's just
Okay.
one unique application.
Cool.
So I worked there for a few years and then left the company for a year and then came back. And I've
Yes.
been within the Hitachi group family for about 8 years now.
Nice. Great. And yeah. And then yeah, for everyone who listened at the start, obviously you're now out in Japan, so still with the same company. So yeah, kind of. At what point did your career go from, yeah, sort of just doing US national work to then doing the international piece? Was that sort of once they got bought out by Hitachi, or was that as soon as you went in there and it was suddenly doing global communications?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was a little bit before Hitachi bought the company. Solaire, we have global offices, so mostly in Australia, China, and the Americas, a little bit of a European presence as well. But
Yes.
Hitachi really expanded that when I moved to my current role. And, Hitachi can be a bit complicated. It's a very matrixed company, as you can imagine.
Mm.
So there's a lot of layers. But, I was with Solaire. Now I'm with kind of the umbrella company over Solaire. So there's, 13 or 15 different companies under this umbrella now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So the scope has grown tremendously.
Yes, yeah, and yeah. And what does international communications in manufacturing look like? Do you want to talk us through a sort of typical week, or yeah, kind of some of the sort of proactive and reactive work you have to do?
Yeah, sure. So it's a bit complicated, as you can imagine. Communications is hard to begin with at times. But when you start having a lot of your workforce, working on assembly lines or in a factory, and they don't have
Mm,
email or they don't have computers,
yes.
reaching those employees is very, very different than your office employees. And then
Mm,
you kind of add in the factor of we have, global locations in almost 15 countries around the world. So all the different languages, all the different cultures and customs of all
mm,
those companies. And, of course, it's not a one channel fits all. I think that's the hardest part. Like some of our locations in China, well, their primary communication method is something like WeChat
okay.
versus in the US, it might be an intranet or email. And then we have, you know, Thailand locations and they use Line. or Japan
Okay.
uses Line, Myanmar uses a thing called Viber. So it's like there's
Okay.
all these different channels, and it makes it
Yes.
very difficult to actually reach every single employee. So that's kind of a challenge I continue to grapple with.
Yes, I can imagine. And yeah, and what works best in those countries? Is it going through their sort of primarily, kind of comms routes? I mean, China, it is, do you have like a company WeChat channel? Is that a thing?
So not yet, but that is a goal hopefully in the next 1 year or so.
Yeah.
But right now we're mostly relying on email and then translating to Mandarin to at least put it in their language. But that's the next step, is actually doing something like that where we know the employees are at and the employees are reading and expecting the communications to come to them.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting question for me, I think, because I guess I've always grown up and I'm very used to Western culture, and yeah, I don't know much about. In fact, I don't know anything around employee engagement in places like China. Yeah, kind of what's it like, sort of, like engaging sort of the workforce there? Do they sort of buy into it? Is it quite a different relationship to how, like employees have with a, sort of with a US business or a UK business if you're local?
I think a little bit different. I think it's a little bit more complicated. I think if you don't kind of give them the messaging, I think more often than not in China, they'll kind of create their own messaging, if you will.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's one difficult thing to do. I think they still really appreciate the in-person, like even the town halls, things like that.
Yeah.
They're very much looking for those. But, we've come a long way where even a year or so ago, we weren't doing the Mandarin and we were kind of pushing the English, which of course, that's never going to be as successful. There are a number of people that speak English in China, but not the majority. So we're kind of taking baby steps to really get to the level that they're expecting.
Yeah. No, nice. Yeah. And you have to do the local translation for all the different countries you operate in as well.
Yes, we're not there yet.
Yeah.
Right now, the focus is on English, Japanese, and Mandarin. So
Okay.
3 languages. But again, over the next year or so, I'm hoping we can expand that. But it's many different languages. So I think we have to focus on, the key ones and understanding where the biggest bases of our employees are. But otherwise, it's going to be difficult because it is so many languages. That's one of the challenges of global communications.
Yes. Yeah. No. Of course. And yeah. And in Japan, culturally, are they quite similar to China in terms of they love their sort of in-person town halls, or kind of what works best there?
Yeah, I think the town halls are important. Email, I think even is still pretty good to them. For our primary method in Japan, we use an intranet or like a communications portal.
Yeah.
But they react a lot to the stories, commenting, liking. And we even have kind of a channel for our CEO on Yammer or Vibe now, I guess it is. But it's interesting how many employees like to go on there and kind of interact with the content.
That's nice. Yeah. And I think a lot of UK and US managing directors would love the same engagement levels from their workforce in those countries, wouldn't they?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I think they're probably a little bit more engaged in Japan than maybe North America. Maybe because there's just so much more communications in North America, I feel like, than Japan, at least that I've seen.
Yeah, that's true. I think, we are just constantly bombarded, aren't we, in the UK and the US? And it can be hard to, hard to make an impact amongst all the noise, right?
Exactly. You're competing against many things.
No, nice. And what's it like on the external comms front? I had a guest on here just before Christmas, a lady called Madeline Little, who used to run APAC comms for JLL, the real estate business. And I remember her sort of telling me a story of sort of when it comes to PR in Japan and like press packs that she'd have to go down to a government building. There would be like a bureau for the real estate industry. And then you would physically post your press releases, which I thought was, I mean, like cool, but also just so alien to like UK comms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I personally haven't seen anything like that, but the method to PR is very different. And this is something I'm trying to tackle with my team over the next year or so too, but right now it's quite reactive. It's just if we have a new product or a new service releasing, then we kind of do a press release. But the idea of the proactive pitching or trying to find stories or angles, it's not there yet in Japan. Versus, what I was accustomed to in the US, it's, creating that editorial calendar a year in advance, always finding the angles, the pitches. So it's a very different ball game. And, a lot of the targets too are most of the newspapers, like Nikkei is the biggest one in Japan. But there aren't so many publications, like even vertical publications. That was something big for us in the US as a manufacturing company.
The amount of trade press.
Yeah, trade press. Totally. That's a huge target for us, but that's even not really there in Japan. So I think you nailed it. It's a totally different ball game in Japan.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? And, I mean, it's not like even, it's not like even Japan is a small, tiny, just emerging economy, right? It's a global powerhouse, yet the comms and the media space and structure is so different.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And I've noticed that a lot since coming to Japan, just the idea of communications and kind of the maturity of it is drastically different than, the US and what I've seen in Europe. And I like doing some of that kind of research to see how it compares to other nations. And, recently, like Spencer Stewart, they had the study about how many CCOs there are in the US. And it was 410 of the top Fortune 500 all have CCOs. Yes. So a couple of weekends ago, I looked at the top 20 companies in Japan. And out of those 20, only one has a chief communications officer. And that's Toyota, the biggest company.
Yes.
So it's interesting when you look at these, hundreds of billions of dollars companies, but they don't have that yet. And
no, it's interesting. Yeah. Kind of really fascinating. And it's interesting in the UK as well, where, the UK probably sits somewhere roughly in the middle. And actually the far more common, C-suite position here is, a sort of CMO, and then communications would report up into that. It's changing a little bit, but it's funny how, kind of different markets just have the different sort of power weightings and balance.
Yeah, exactly. And, at Hitachi Limited itself, there's no CCO yet, and the top of communications reports into HR. So kind of similar to what you see. When I was looking at some of the other top companies, one of the top 3 largest companies in Japan, looking at all the things he oversaw. So it's not just communications, but like he was also overseeing sustainability and quality and legal and compliance. So it's interesting how they group it all together.
Yes, and having legal and compliance as part of the same function. I think, comms teams obviously have to work closely with legal and compliance. But in the UK or the US, you'd never have them in the same team.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's really interesting to see. I'm hopeful for maybe in the next 5 or 10 years, Japan will start to realize the value of it being its own function and, having a seat at the table like the other functions.
Yes, it would be an interesting one to keep an eye on, certainly. They're quite a conservative culture, so it may take a bit of time, but yeah, hopefully it'll get there.
I hope so too, yes.
Yeah.
I'll keep doing my best personally.
Yes. Yeah, and keep asking for that kind of job title change, and yeah.
I will do my best.
Great. Yeah, and sort of with a nod to looking at that kind of global picture, what do you think works best when you're looking at a sort of global communication strategy? How do you go about tackling it?
Yeah, I think the key is probably understanding your audience. And because it is so different in each region, even internally, as I was mentioning earlier with employees, but externally as well, it's not easy to create just one strategy, if you will. You almost have to have different for each region and really customize it to that area. So I think it's a difficult thing, and you have to kind of prioritize what regions are the priority when you have, offices or employees or customers in so many different regions, understanding where they are at and what the priority and what the focus should be.
Yes. And you personally sort of drawing or mapping that out, do you have like a comms grid? What do you use? Is it all just stored up in here?
Well, no. There's a little bit on paper, of course.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's constantly changing, right? It's not just setting it and forgetting it at the beginning of the fiscal year, and just refining as we go. I think that's an important piece too, is of course you always have learnings, and if there are mistakes made along the way, of course we change gears as needed. But it's really important to be a bit flexible to have the most success.
Yes, I think, the ability to be agile and and pivot and tack is really crucial, because as you say, you can have your comms calendar in place with sort of key dates or holidays or whatever it is sort of penciled in, but then something happens one day and kind of the news agenda or the news cycle changes and you have to pivot, right?
You're exactly right. And I think we're seeing, more of those challenges and more of those crises coming up and such that we have to not just be in a position to react to, but in a position to be more defensive about it too. As, the expectations of stakeholders are rising so much. And, it's, do we say something about this issue or do we not? Or how do we react to it? So I think just the whole dynamic of being in the communications field has changed so much, even in the past 3 or 5 years. I'm sure you see that a lot too, but it's just an interesting time.
Yeah, speaking to all of my kind of candidates, clients, hiring managers, I guess probably the easy way to put it, probably the geopolitical, societal impact on a communications function has been huge, really quite something. And there's lots of stakeholders, particularly in Western countries, now almost expect companies to to kind of take a stand or to comment on various sort of geopolitical societal issues that really don't have a huge amount to do with the core business. Yes. But they're still expected to say something.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And we're seeing that more and more. And I think this year, especially with all the elections taking place and a majority of kind of the GDP, having elections this year and just the impact that's going to have, it's going to be a really interesting year, I think.
Yes. And do you find in your role, are there sort of countries or regions where you find, there's more pressure to say something or to have an opinion on something versus others?
I think to an extent, yes. More so probably the Americas and Europe, certainly, especially about sustainability. In Europe, we're getting a lot more questions about our products and services and what kind of impact they have. So I think that's a big one. DEI, other topics like that in the US. We also see more pushback in the US. It's interesting when we run some of our social media campaigns and some of the comments that come in. People are not afraid to voice their opposition to things like DEI in the Americas. But at the same time, we find a lot of our employees and just general stakeholders are looking for that, especially, when choosing a company. If, a candidate is looking at companies side by side, they may choose the company that takes a stronger position on it. So we're not backing down by any means, but we're just seeing more opposition to it.
No, yeah, that's true. It's it's a bit of a juxtaposition, isn't it? You have all of the, I guess you have all of the data and the opinion that says internally or from an EVP perspective, it's the right thing to do. But then, you have the likes of end wokeness on X and Musk, all pushing back quite hard, right? And yes,
absolutely. But then there's Mark Cuban. I don't know if you saw that, but he kind of stepped in and, told Elon Musk that things like DEI are the right thing. So there's always both sides, I guess.
Yeah, no, yes, exactly. And, but no, it's just an interesting one, isn't it? I think, sort of how the pendulum sort of swings back and forwards in places like the US and Europe. And I'm guessing in other cultures like in Asia, I guess there's less appetite for it, or there's just less sort of pressure on companies to say something.
I think maybe it's a mixture. Speaking for Japan, because that's probably where I have the most experience now. The understanding of things like DEI is very different than in Western cultures. I'm finding that when people talk about DEI in Japan, it's more about either women or non-Japanese, but there's not as much focus on things like, sexual orientation or religion or other things. So there's maybe not as much understanding. So thereby, I think there's not as much emphasis or expectation of, employers to bring that up. But I think there's some change to that. I think especially some of our younger employees are paying more attention to it and kind of appreciate that. But maybe more of the older generation or the people who've been in the workforce for a while, there's not as much empathy or understanding of it.
Yes. Yeah. No, I can imagine that and picture that. But I guess it's fascinating with those sort of global sunglasses on and and looking at the whole picture and how it moves. In terms of sort of storylines or types of content or campaigns that work well globally, or even maybe things that work best in different regions. How do you find that? So by that I mean, how in the UK and the US, a lot of corporate communications now lands well if it has a bit of a storyline behind it, or there's that sort of human, personal element to the story. Whereas you mentioned earlier, I think in Japan around press releases, a lot of it is quite product focused. So how does that vary, do you find, between regions?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Japan is still more focused on the hardware or the software, right? The products or services. But outside of that, and even China, I think, is very different than Japan. They're more open to the human angle, more of the even sustainability or the CSR type of stories or narratives. I think those go over very well. And then similarly in Europe and the Americas, same thing. It's more about the the human behind the hardware or the software or what good the company is doing. But one consistent thing that even does well in Japan are more of the CSR type things. Our employees and external stakeholders are very receptive to CSR, and they get engaged in some of our activities. So that's kind of one common thing we found is
that's
very well received globally. Yeah.
Yeah, no matter where you do it, but yeah, CSR even more so than the sort of ESG or sustainability piece is the thing that you can trust across the globe that will be fine.
Absolutely, yes. So it's interesting to learn these different things about all the different regions, because going in, it's tough to know what will stick or what won't.
No, but it's quite nice to know. No, everyone has a heart, no matter where you are in the world, and the CSR bit, resonates, which is nice.
Exactly.
And also quite reassuring.
Exactly, yes. Restores some faith in humanity sometimes.
Yeah, no, exactly, which is great. No, nice. And anything, and on the flip side of that, is there anything that you would advise? People not to do, or things to avoid?
Not particularly. I think just the key is, again, understanding your audience as best you can. I haven't run into anything too massively destructive. Just like I mentioned, just the DEI is kind of coming up more as opposition in the Americas, but don't stop that, of course. There's just as many people are opposing it, just as many people are looking for it, if not more. So we can never back down on things just because there are a few strong voices.
No, and I think particularly on those sorts of topics, I think as long as it's, I guess, as long as your key stakeholders are on board with the message, great, green light it. So, if a random popular, kind of Twitter or X channel is pushing back against it, but hey, they're not your employees or they're not your customers.
You're exactly right.
You don't actually need to listen to it.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And as long as the actions that your company is taking, behind the scenes align with that, and it's not just fluff or empty narrative, I think
that's the important thing, actually, isn't it?
Another thing too. And I think, we'll see that next month a lot, right? With International Women's Day and certain things where a lot of companies come out of the woodwork, but, come to find out there's not much behind it.
Oh God, yeah, I can just picture the International Women's Day pushback already. Yeah, like, what about International Women's Day? Yeah. Oh God, I can just see it already. Yeah,
I know. Get the popcorn ready.
Yeah. Oh, joys. Oh, the joys. Just thinking about your global experience again as well. You must have worked for some great MDs and some great CEOs. Who's been your favorite CEO to work for, and why?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, like most communications professionals, I've certainly had my time of working for some not so good CEOs and some good CEOs. But definitely my current CEO in my role is by far the best. I think not all companies and not all CEOs understand the importance of communications, or it's just kind of seen as a cost center versus more a strategic driver of the business. But my current CEO, he really understands and supports communications, and he participates in communications, and the amount of time that he dedicates to, in-person meetings with employees and town halls, not just in Japan, but around the world, and just very supportive and, really respects the opinion.
Kind of plug, or have you got any events coming up?
No, nothing for me to share. I just really appreciate, the opportunity to come on here and talk with you and, communications is changing and really important to every company. So I hope that it continues to be elevated for companies around the world, and especially Japan.
Yes, it's been a pleasure. And look, and genuinely really good insights. So yeah, thank you. And where can people find you? Is LinkedIn the best place?
Yeah, LinkedIn, absolutely. I'm happy to connect or answer any questions or share any advice that I can.
Great.
Especially for those interested in being an expat.
Yes, that would be great. Yeah, like in any sort of insights or little tips on moving to Japan as well. I'm sure people would appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'd love to.
Great. Super. Well, enjoy it's going to be coming towards the evening now for you. And it's morning for me, so I need to get a coffee in a minute. And speak soon.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Max.
Smashing. Cheers, Stephanie.
All right.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. That was the wonderful Stephanie Roberts. Really hoped you enjoyed our conversation and her insights on global communication strategy and execution. Absolutely loved her insights, particularly on what works both externally and internally from a comms perspective in Eastern cultures. Both Japan and China are two countries and territories which I don't know a huge amount about when it comes to corporate communications. So yeah, really love the insights there on what works well, and and also great to know that certainly CSR campaigns and comms works really well globally, no matter the country or the region. So that's something that all parts of the world have in common. So nice to know that everybody has a heart, no matter what the press might say, particularly here in the UK. So that was great. Look forward to hosting you on the next Comms Coffee Club podcast. Thanks once again, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow the podcast wherever you like to consume it.